Atlas refused the gift before Caleb Rowe even saw the name that was not there. Christmas morning had come softly to the little house at the edge of Briar Falls, laying pale snow across the porch rails and turning the gravel drive white under a clean December sky. Inside, the living room glowed with the quiet warmth of a small American Christmas. A pine tree stood beside the front window, modest but carefully dressed, with white lights, red ribbon, and a few old ornaments Caleb had finally taken out of storage after years of leaving the box untouched. The fireplace breathed low and steady. Coffee steamed on the side table. A wool stocking hung from the mantel for Atlas, stitched with crooked letters Caleb had ordered from a woman at the church craft fair. Beneath the tree were 3 simple gifts wrapped in green paper, all for the German shepherd who had done more to keep Caleb alive in spirit than any person in town fully understood. One held a braided rope toy. One held a new leather lead. One held a package of treats from the feed store that smelled strongly enough to make most dogs forget every rule they had ever learned. But Atlas did not touch them. He stood between Caleb and the tree, his dark sable and tan coat shining in the firelight, amber eyes fixed not on the treats, not on the stocking, not on the bright paper Caleb had folded clumsily the night before, but on a 4th package Caleb did not remember placing there. It sat half-hidden behind the lowest branches, small and square, wrapped in old brown paper and tied with plain twine. No bow, no bright tag, no printed snowman or smiling reindeer. Just a quiet little box waiting in the shadow of the tree as if it had always belonged there. Caleb stood in the doorway wearing a gray sweatshirt, worn jeans, and thick socks, one hand still wrapped around his coffee mug. He had planned this morning carefully. Nothing fancy, nothing loud. Just breakfast, a fire, a few gifts for Atlas, maybe a walk down to Willow Creek if the snow stayed light. After the long season they had survived together, Caleb had wanted one peaceful day that did not ask anything from either of them. He had wanted Christmas to feel simple again. Atlas had other plans. "Come on, partner," Caleb said, keeping his voice gentle. "Those are yours." Atlas did not look at him. His ears stayed forward, body still, tail low but not tucked. Caleb took 2 steps into the room and reached toward the green package closest to the rug. Atlas moved instantly, not with panic, not with aggression, but with firm, silent purpose. He placed himself in front of Caleb's hand and lowered his head just enough to block the gift. Caleb froze. The fire cracked softly behind them. Outside, a truck passed far down the county road, tires whispering over snow. Caleb tried to smile, but it faded before it reached his eyes. "What is it?" Atlas slowly turned his head toward the brown package beneath the branches. Caleb followed the dog's gaze. At first, he saw only paper and twine. Then he noticed the corner, faded and slightly creased, marked by 3 tiny stars drawn in black ink. His breath stopped. The mug warmed his hand. The fire warmed the room. Christmas lights glowed against the window glass. Yet something cold and familiar moved through Caleb's chest. He knew those stars. He had not seen them in years. Atlas took 1 step back from the tree, then sat down between Caleb and the gift like a guard at a chapel door, waiting for the man he loved to understand that not every present was meant to be opened first. Caleb did not move toward the brown package right away. He stood in the warm doorway with his coffee cooling in his hand, staring at those 3 tiny stars as if they had been drawn straight through time. The room remained gentle around him. The tree lights blinked softly against the window. The fire settled with a low hush. Snow brushed the glass in slow white strokes. Everything looked like Christmas, but Caleb suddenly felt like he was standing at the edge of a memory he had spent years walking around. Atlas sat perfectly still between him and the tree, broad chest lifted, ears forward, eyes patient. Not frightened, not excited. Waiting. That was what struck Caleb most. The German shepherd was not refusing joy. He was delaying it, holding something in place until Caleb caught up. "I wrapped 3, Caleb whispered. His voice sounded too loud in the quiet room. There were only 3. Atlas glanced toward the mantel. Caleb followed his gaze to the red stocking stitched with Atlas's name. It hung beside Caleb's own plain stocking, the one Mrs. Bell had left on his porch 2 weeks earlier with a note that said, "A house with a tree needs more than one." Caleb had laughed when he found it, then stood there longer than he should have with the stocking in his hands. He had not hung one for himself since leaving the service. Christmas had become easier to survive when he treated it like any other day. Coffee, chores, quiet, lights off by 9. No old songs. No phone calls he did not know how to answer. But this year was supposed to be different. Atlas had made it different. The dog had followed him through too many silent mornings, slept beside too many closed doors, and looked at him with too much steady faith for Caleb to keep pretending peace was something meant for other people. So he bought a tree. He made a fire. He wrapped gifts for the one soul who never asked for anything except to stay near him. Caleb set the mug down on the side table and took one careful step forward. Atlas rose at once, not blocking him now, but guiding him with the quiet precision of a creature who knew the order of things better than he did. The shepherd walked to the mantel and touched his nose to the stocking. Caleb frowned gently. "You want this first?" Atlas looked back. Caleb lifted the stocking from its hook. It was heavier than it should have been. He had placed the rope toy inside last night, along with a small packet of treats. That was all. He was certain. Yet something hard rested at the bottom, wrapped in tissue paper. Caleb reached in and pulled it out. It was a small wooden ornament, round as a silver dollar but thicker, carved by hand. A truck, a dog, 3 stars above them. Caleb's throat tightened before he understood why. The carving was simple, almost childlike, but the 3 stars were unmistakable. Mason Reed used to draw them on everything during December. On paper cups, on field notes, on the corners of letters he never mailed on time. He said 3 stars meant somebody was saving you a place, even if you were too far away to see the porch light. Caleb turned the ornament over. On the back, in small burned letters, were 4 words. "Bring him home, Atlas." Caleb shut his eyes. The fire popped once, bright and sudden, and Atlas stepped closer until his shoulder touched Caleb's knee. A memory opened, soft at first, then full. Mason sitting on the lowered tailgate of a military truck years ago, wearing a Santa hat someone had mailed from Ohio, laughing while he whittled little shapes from scrap wood with a pocket knife he used more for gifts than for utility. Atlas was young then, paws too large, ears high, leaning against Mason's boot like he had already chosen the men he would spend his life protecting. Caleb remembered shaking his head and saying Christmas felt strange so far from home. Mason had looked up at him, half smiling, half serious. "Christmas is not where you are," he said. "It is who still saves a place for you." Caleb opened his eyes. The ornament trembled slightly in his hand. Across the room, the brown package waited under the lowest branch of the tree, patient as dawn. Atlas did not move toward it yet. He only stayed beside Caleb, warm and certain, as if to say the first door had opened, but not the last. Caleb held the ornament as if it weighed more than wood. The words on the back stayed under his thumb, warm from his skin now, but still impossible. "Bring him home, Atlas." He read them once, then again. Each time, the room seemed to pull farther away from the present and closer to a Christmas he had tried not to remember. The firelight blurred along the edges of the mantel. Snow kept moving softly outside. Atlas stood so close that Caleb could feel the shepherd's breath against his wrist, steady and patient, not hurrying him toward the brown package, not letting him retreat from it either. That was Atlas's gift, Caleb thought. He never forced a door open. He only waited beside it until Caleb had the courage to turn the handle. Caleb lowered himself into the armchair. The ornament rested in his palm, the carved truck and dog facing upward now. His eyes moved to the tree, then to the brown package half hidden beneath it. "How did this get here?" he whispered. Atlas looked toward the front window. Caleb followed his gaze. Beyond the glass, the porch was empty except for a light dusting of snow and one narrow trail of paw prints leading from the steps to the edge of the yard. Caleb frowned. They were not Atlas's prints. Too small. Maybe from a neighbor's dog. Maybe from a stray crossing through before dawn. Maybe from something ordinary the morning had dressed in mystery, because Caleb wanted it to mean more. He almost accepted that explanation. Then he saw the corner of a plain white envelope tucked between the brown package and the tree skirt. His name was written on it in block letters, faded but clear. Caleb Rowe. The handwriting was not Mason's. It belonged to Mason's mother, Elaine Reed. Caleb knew because for 2 years after he came home, she had sent him Christmas cards from a small town outside Boise. He had answered the first one, maybe the second. Then the replies became too hard. Not because she blamed him. That would have been easier. She had been kind. Too kind. She wrote about snow, church suppers, Mason's nieces growing tall, and how some chairs at Christmas tables stayed empty but still loved. Caleb had kept every card in a box in the garage, unopened after the third year. He looked down at Atlas. "Elaine," he said, the name barely leaving his mouth. Atlas's ears shifted. Caleb slid the envelope free but did not open it yet. The paper was old, softened at the corners, sealed with yellowed tape that had held longer than Caleb's courage. He turned it over. On the back was a note in smaller writing. "Mason asked me to save this until the right Christmas. I think your dog will know when." Caleb pressed the envelope to his chest before he meant to. No grand sound came from him. No dramatic sob. Just a breath, broken enough to be honest. Years seemed to gather in the room, not as accusation, but as witness. The missed cards. The unanswered calls. The quiet Decembers when Caleb told himself he was sparing everyone by staying away. All this time, someone had still been saving him a place. Atlas stepped forward and rested his chin on Caleb's knee. The weight of it grounded him. Caleb opened the envelope slowly. Inside was a short letter from Elaine, written in blue ink. She said Mason had left a small package with her before his final deployment, laughing when he told her it was for a stubborn Marine who would probably pretend he did not need Christmas. She said she had waited for a sign, and when Caleb stopped writing, she had almost mailed it then. But something in her held back. Then, 2 weeks ago, Mrs. Bell called her after finding the old Reed address on one of Caleb's unopened cards while helping organize a church veterans drive. They talked. They prayed in their own quiet ways. And Elaine decided this was the year. Caleb read the last line twice. Mason believed love could find its way home, even if it had to follow a dog to get there. Caleb lowered the letter. Atlas was still watching him. The brown package waited beneath the tree. This time, when Caleb reached toward it, Atlas did not stop him. Caleb reached beneath the tree with the care of a man approaching something sacred and fragile. The brown paper felt dry beneath his fingers, older than the bright green wrapping he had used the night before, and the twine had been tied in a simple square knot. No tape, no ribbon, no store label, just paper, string, and those 3 small stars in the corner, drawn by a hand that had once made even difficult places feel less lonely. Atlas sat beside the armchair, no longer blocking him, no longer guiding him forward. The German shepherd simply watched, amber eyes calm, as if his part had been to bring Caleb to this moment and then trust him with the rest. Caleb set the package on his lap. The fire cast soft orange light over his hands. Outside, snow slid from a pine branch and landed with a quiet hush on the porch rail. Inside, the whole house seemed to listen. Caleb loosened the twine and folded it neatly beside him, the way Mason used to save string from care packages because he said useful things deserved a second life. The paper opened with a tired whisper. Inside was a small cedar box, plain and sanded smooth, its lid marked with the same 3 stars. Caleb ran his thumb over them, and the smell rose at once. Cedar, leather, a faint trace of campfire smoke that could not possibly still be there, and yet it was, or memory supplied it, because the heart knows how to finish what the senses begin. He lifted the lid. The first thing inside was a photograph. Caleb, Mason, and Atlas stood beside a short-field Christmas tree made from green canvas strips tied to a pole. Someone had hung bottle caps and paper stars from it. Caleb looked younger, face leaner, white skin browned by sun, eyes tired but still open to laughter. Mason stood beside him with one arm around Caleb's shoulders and the other hand resting on Atlas's head. Atlas was smaller then, not fully grown, proud and alert with oversized paws planted in the dust. Caleb remembered that day. Mason had insisted they take the picture because, according to him, no Christmas tree was too ugly to become family history. Beneath the photo lay a folded red bandana, faded at the edges. Caleb recognized it before he touched it. Mason had tied it loosely around Atlas's neck that Christmas morning, calling him the best-dressed Marine on the whole base. Atlas leaned forward and sniffed the bandana. A soft sound left him, low and gentle, not sadness exactly, but recognition. Caleb let the cloth rest against his palm. At the bottom of the box was a letter, folded once, with Caleb's name written across it in Mason's bold, uneven handwriting. For a moment, Caleb could not open it. The room blurred. The fire, the tree, the snow, the dog beside him, all of it held still. Then Atlas pressed his nose under Caleb's hand. not pushing, asking him not to stop. Caleb unfolded the letter. The paper had yellowed, but the words were clear. Mason wrote like he talked, plain and warm, with a little humor tucked into places where pain might otherwise sit. He said if Caleb was reading this, then Christmas had somehow found him again, which meant Atlas had done his job better than any of them deserved. He said the world would try to convince Caleb that coming home meant leaving the ones they lost behind, but that was not true. Coming home meant carrying them into rooms with light, setting a place for them in stories, and letting the living keep living. Caleb stopped there, jaw tight, one hand covering his mouth. Atlas stayed pressed against his knee, steady as a heartbeat. Caleb read the final lines slowly. If you forget how to celebrate, start small. Hang the stars. Feed the dog something he is not supposed to have. Let somebody love you without making them prove they will stay. And when Atlas refuses to move, listen to him. He has always known the way home better than we do. Caleb lowered the letter to his lap. Across the room, the 3 green gifts still sat unopened. The coffee had gone cold. The fire had burned low. But for the first time in years, Christmas did not feel like a day asking Caleb to pretend. It felt like a hand reaching across time, not to pull him backward, but to guide him gently toward the life still waiting in front of him. Caleb sat with Mason's letter open on his lap until the fire settled into red coals and the snow outside turned the window glass soft and bright. Atlas did not rush him. The German shepherd simply remained beside the chair, shoulder against Caleb's knee, breathing slow, giving the kind of company that never tried to fill silence with noise. Caleb read the letter again, then a third time. The words did not change, but he did. Each reading loosened something in him, not enough to erase the ache, but enough to let air move through it. Let somebody love you without making them prove they will stay. Caleb looked down at Atlas, at the gray beginning to show around his muzzle, at the strong paws resting on the rug, at the red bandana now lying across his lap beside the photograph. You stayed, Caleb said softly. Atlas lifted his eyes. That was all. No ceremony. No grand answer. Just the same faithful gaze that had followed Caleb through bad nights, quiet winters, broken engines, and years when Christmas had felt like a room he was not allowed to enter. Caleb folded the letter with care and placed it back in the cedar box. Then he stood, carrying the ornament with the truck, the dog, and 3 stars. The tree waited in the corner, lights glowing warm against the green branches. Most of Caleb's ornaments were plain. A brass bell from Mrs. Bell, a wooden snowflake from the church sale, a glass ball he had found wrapped in newspaper from a life before Briar Falls. But near the top, below the simple tin star, there was an open place. Caleb hung Mason's ornament there. It turned slowly once, catching the firelight. Atlas watched it move. Caleb stepped back. For a moment, the room seemed to hold all 3 of them without strain. Mason in the letter, Atlas in the warmth, Caleb still standing, still here. A knock came at the front door, gentle but certain. Atlas turned his head but did not bark. Caleb crossed the room and opened it. Mrs. Bell stood on the porch wearing a red knit hat dusted with snow, holding a covered plate in both hands. Behind her, the small trail of footprints curved away through the yard. Not dog prints after all. Her boots. Caleb looked at the plate, then at her face. She knew enough not to smile too brightly. Elaine Reed called me 2 weeks ago, Mrs. Bell said. She wanted to make sure it arrived before Christmas morning. I put it under the tree last night when I dropped off the firewood basket. You had left the back door unlocked for Atlas. Caleb's hand tightened on the doorframe. The mystery did not vanish. It changed shape. It became kinder. Human hands. Old promises. A neighbor who understood that some gifts needed to appear quietly or they would never be accepted. You should have told me, Caleb said, but there was no anger in it. Mrs. Bell tilted her head. Would you have opened it? Caleb looked back at Atlas. The shepherd stood beside the tree now, beneath the ornament, calm as if he had known the answer all along. Caleb let out a breath that was almost a laugh and almost something else. Probably not. Mrs. Bell nodded and handed him the plate. Cinnamon rolls. Still warm. And there is a call waiting if you want it. Elaine said no pressure. Just Christmas. Caleb looked past her to the quiet road, the white yards, the smoke rising from chimneys across Briar Falls. For years, he had believed being alone was the safest way to keep grief from spilling onto anyone else. But love had crossed miles anyway. It had come through a mother's patience, a neighbor's hands, an old friend's letter, and a dog who refused to open the wrong gift first. Caleb swallowed. "Tell her I will call," he said. Mrs. Bell's eyes softened. "Tell her yourself." When she left, Caleb closed the door and stood there with the warm plate in his hands. Atlas came to his side. Caleb looked at the unopened green packages beneath the tree, then at the cedar box, then at the ornament turning gently under the light. "All right," he whispered. "Now we can start Christmas." Caleb set the plate of cinnamon rolls on the kitchen counter, but he did not reach for one yet. The house felt different after Mrs. Bell left, not because the mystery had become smaller, but because it had become real enough to hold. There was no lightning in it, no impossible sign, just Elaine Reed remembering a promise, Mrs. Bell crossing the snow before dawn, Mason's old letter waiting in a cedar box, and Atlas knowing, somehow, that Caleb needed to open the past before he could touch the joy in front of him. That was enough. Maybe that was what grace usually looked like when it arrived in ordinary homes. Not loud, not shining from the sky, but wrapped in brown paper and carried by people who still cared. Caleb poured fresh coffee, added a little cream for the first time in months, and sat beside the phone on the small table near the hallway. Atlas followed him, then settled at his feet, close enough that Caleb could feel the warmth of the shepherd's body through his socks. The number Elaine had written was folded beside the cedar box. Caleb stared at it for a long while. Calling felt harder than opening the package. A letter could wait silently. A voice answered back. A voice could forgive him, and somehow that frightened him more than blame. Atlas lifted his head and rested his chin on Caleb's knee. Caleb looked down. "You are not going to let me skip this part, are you?" Atlas blinked once, slow and solemn. Caleb breathed out, picked up the phone, and dialed before courage could change its mind. The line rang 3 times. Then a woman answered, older now, but unmistakably warm. "Hello." Caleb closed his eyes. For 1 second, every Christmas card he had left unopened seemed to rustle somewhere inside him. "Mrs. Reed," he said. His voice came out rough. "It is Caleb Rowe." There was a quiet pause, not empty, but full. Then Elaine said his name like she had been saving it carefully. "Caleb." He gripped the edge of the table. "I got the box." Another pause. He could hear a clock ticking faintly on her end, maybe a kitchen clock, maybe one that had watched over years of waiting. "Mason hoped you would," she said. Caleb looked toward the tree. The ornament with 3 stars hung beneath the tin star, catching the light each time the fire shifted. "I am sorry I stopped writing." The words came before he could make them polished. "I did not know how to keep being part of anything." Elaine's breath trembled softly, but her voice stayed kind. Grief can make a person think silence is protection. Caleb swallowed. Atlas pressed closer against his leg. "It was not." "No," Elaine said gently. "But you are calling now." That broke something open in him, not sharply, but like ice thinning over a creek. Caleb bowed his head. They spoke for nearly 20 minutes. Not about heavy things at first. Elaine told him Boise had snow that morning. Her granddaughters were taller now. Mason's old stocking still hung by her fireplace. Caleb told her about Briar Falls, about Mrs. Bell, about the truck, about how Atlas had grown gray around the muzzle, but still acted like he outranked everyone in the room. Elaine laughed then, and the sound was so much like forgiveness that Caleb had to look away. When the call ended, Caleb did not feel healed. Not completely. Healing was not a switch thrown in a warm room. But something had shifted. A chair long empty had been pulled back to the table. A door had opened. Caleb sat still, phone in hand, until Atlas nudged his wrist toward the tree. The green packages waited beneath the branches. Caleb wiped his eyes with his sleeve and let out a quiet breath. "You earned yours," he said. This time, when he picked up the first gift, Atlas did not block him. The shepherd lowered his front paws to the rug, tail moving once, then twice. Careful joy returning like morning light. Caleb tore a corner of the paper, then let Atlas take over. The German shepherd nosed the wrapping, pulled it loose with gentle teeth, and uncovered the braided rope toy inside. Caleb laughed, truly laughed, when Atlas lifted it proudly and carried it in a circle around the room. The sound startled him with its own warmth. Outside, snow continued falling over Briar Falls. Inside, Christmas finally began. Atlas carried the braided rope toy as if it were something official, circling the living room with careful pride, while Caleb sat back in the armchair and watched him rediscover the morning. The German shepherd did not tear into the other gifts at once. That was not his way. He brought the rope to Caleb first, placed it across his knees, and waited until Caleb took one end. "You want to test it?" Caleb asked, his voice lighter than it had been when the day began. Atlas lowered his front legs, tail moving now with open joy, and gave one gentle pull. Caleb laughed again. The sound filled the room differently the second time, less surprising, more welcome, like a guest who had finally been invited to sit down. They played for a few minutes beside the fire, not rough, just enough for Atlas to huff proudly and Caleb to feel warmth in his hands. Then Atlas released the rope and turned toward the second gift, the new leather lead wrapped in green paper. Caleb opened it for him, smoothing the lead between his fingers. It was dark brown, strong, simple, with brass hardware and a soft grip. "For walks that do not need a reason," Caleb said. Atlas sniffed it, then looked toward the front door. Outside, snow had slowed to a fine drift. The road beyond the window lay quiet beneath a clean white cover. Caleb glanced at the tree. Mason's ornament hung still now, 3 stars facing the room. The cedar box rested beneath it, open, no longer a secret. The letter lay folded inside, beside the faded red bandana and the old photograph. Caleb stood and clipped the new lead to Atlas's collar. The little tags gave a bright sound, one old, one new, touching together like memory and mourning. They stepped out through the front door into the cold. The air smelled of snow, chimney smoke, and pine. Briar Falls was waking slowly. A few houses glowed with Christmas lights. A plastic Santa leaned cheerfully from the Hendersons' porch. Someone had built a small snowman beside a mailbox and given it a scarf too large for its body. Caleb and Atlas walked down the county road, boots and paws pressing fresh marks into the snow. No truck today, no engine, no need to outrun the quiet. Just a man and his dog moving through a morning that no longer felt closed to them. At Mrs. Bell's house, smoke curled from the chimney, and a wreath hung crooked on the door. Caleb paused at the end of her walk. For years, he would have kept going, afraid that stopping meant conversation, and conversation meant being seen. Atlas looked up at him. Caleb looked down at Atlas. "I know," he said. He walked up the shoveled path and knocked. Mrs. Bell opened the door with flour on one sleeve and a smile she tried to hide. "Merry Christmas, Caleb." He held out the plate she had brought earlier, now empty except for a folded dish towel. "Merry Christmas," he said. The words came slowly but cleanly. "And thank you." Mrs. Bell looked from him to Atlas, then back again. She did not make the moment bigger than it needed to be. "You are welcome." Atlas leaned forward and touched his nose politely to her hand. She laughed softly and reached into her apron pocket for a small biscuit. "I had a feeling he would be ready for this one." Atlas accepted it with solemn gratitude. Caleb almost said something about the package, about Elaine, about Mason, about the way kindness sometimes knew how to enter a house through the back door before a man was brave enough to open the front. But the words gathered and rested instead. Mrs. Bell seemed to understand. On the walk home, the sky opened into pale blue, and sunlight spread over the snow in quiet sheets. Caleb felt the phone in his pocket, felt the promise of future calls, future cards, future Christmas mornings that might still hurt, but would not have to be endured alone. When they reached the porch, Atlas stopped and looked back over the road they had taken. Caleb stood beside him, breathing in the cold. "Good walk," he said. Atlas pressed his shoulder against Caleb's leg, as if answering that it was more than that. It was a beginning. Back inside, the house welcomed them with warmth that seemed to have waited at the door. Caleb unclipped the new leather lead and hung it carefully beside his coat, not tossed over a chair, not dropped on the table, but placed where future walks could find it easily. Atlas shook a dusting of snow from his coat, then padded straight to the tree and sat beneath Mason's ornament. The 3 stars turned slightly above him, catching the firelight in small golden flashes. Caleb stood in the middle of the living room with his hands at his sides and felt something unfamiliar settle over him. Not happiness exactly, something quieter. Permission. Permission to keep the ache and still let the morning be good. Permission to miss Mason and still taste cinnamon on his fingers. Permission to let Atlas have his gifts without pretending the first gift had not been meant for Caleb. He picked up the last green package from under the tree, the one with the treats from the feed store, and sat cross-legged on the rug. Atlas watched him with dignified focus, ears high, tail sweeping once against the floor. "This one I know you smelled last night," Caleb said. The shepherd's eyes brightened, but he waited. Caleb tore the paper and opened the bag, letting the warm scent of peanut butter and smoked turkey fill the room. "Mason said something about feeding you what you are not supposed to have," Caleb murmured. "But we are not telling Mrs. Bell." Atlas accepted the treat with careful gentleness, then licked his nose as if sealing a private agreement. Caleb gave him one more, then folded the bag and set it safely on the mantel. The cedar box still rested on the side table. Caleb lifted the old red bandana from inside and turned it in his hands. It was faded, soft from years, with one corner marked by the faint outline of those 3 stars. Atlas stepped closer as Caleb knelt before him. "May I?" he asked, because after everything this dog had carried, even a small thing deserved respect. Atlas lowered his head. Caleb tied the bandana loosely around his neck. For a second, the years folded gently over each other. The young dog in the photograph. The older dog by the tree. Mason's laughter somewhere in memory. Caleb's hand resting steady against warm fur. Atlas looked up, proud and calm, and Caleb smiled through the sting in his eyes. He took the photograph from the cedar box and placed it on the shelf beside the one already there, where the morning light could reach it. Then he opened the drawer that held the old Christmas cards from Elaine Reed, the ones he had never answered, and carried them to the table. He did not open all of them. Not yet. Healing did not need to prove itself by rushing. He opened one. Just one. Inside was a simple message written years earlier, wishing him peace, telling him that Mason had loved stories about Atlas, and that if Caleb ever passed through Boise, there would always be coffee waiting. Caleb sat with that card for a long time. Atlas lay beside his chair, red bandana bright against his dark sable coat, rope toy between his paws. The house moved around them in small, blessed sounds. Firewood shifting, clock ticking, snow sliding from the roof, coffee dripping into the pot for a second cup. Near noon, Caleb took out a blank card from the desk. His hand hovered over the paper. Then he wrote, "Dear Elaine, thank you for saving him a place in Christmas, and thank you for saving one for me." The words were uneven, but they were true. Atlas lifted his head when the pen stopped. Caleb looked down at him. "You ready to help me mail this tomorrow?" Atlas thumped his tail once. Outside, the day shone white and clear. Inside, under the tree, there were scraps of green paper, a cedar box, a faithful dog in a red bandana, and a man learning that some gifts take years to arrive because the heart has to be ready to open them. By evening, the snow had stopped, and Briar Falls rested under a sky washed clean and pale. Caleb did not turn off the tree lights when the room began to darken. He let them glow against the window, soft white reflections floating over the glass while the world outside turned blue. Atlas slept on the rug beneath the tree, the faded red bandana around his neck, the braided rope toy tucked between his paws, one ear moving now and then at the small sounds of the house. Caleb sat at the table with Elaine's card in front of him and his own reply drying beside it. The words were not perfect. They did not need to be. For years, he had believed healing required saying everything correctly, explaining every silence, naming every hurt in the right order. But Christmas had taught him something gentler. Sometimes returning began with one honest sentence, one opened envelope, one old ornament finally given a place in the light. He folded the card, sealed it, and set it beside the cedar box. Then he carried the box to the shelf and placed it beneath Mason's photograph. Not hidden away, not treated like a wound, held like family history. The 3-star ornament hung near the top of the tree, turning slightly whenever warm air rose from the fireplace. Caleb stood before it with Atlas beside him now, awake and leaning lightly against his leg. "He saved us a place," Caleb said. Atlas looked up at the ornament, then back at Caleb, amber eyes calm in the firelight. Caleb knelt and rested both hands against the shepherd's thick fur. "And you made sure I found it." Atlas gave one slow wag, humble as ever, as if he had only done the obvious thing. Later, Caleb warmed the last cinnamon roll, broke off a small dog-safe bite from the plain edge, and offered it with a quiet smile. Atlas took it gently, then settled beside the armchair while Caleb read one more of Elaine's old cards. Outside, porch lights shone across the road. Mrs. Bell's wreath moved slightly in the wind. Somewhere down the street, Children laughed as someone pulled a sled over packed snow. Life had not become simple. The ache had not vanished. Mason was still gone. The years of silence were still real. But the room no longer felt built around absence. It held memory, warmth, apology, laughter, and the steady breathing of a loyal dog who knew when joy had to wait until grief was welcome too. Before bed, Caleb stood at the front door and looked out over the white yard. In other years, he would have felt the old emptiness rising with the cold. Tonight, he felt Atlas press against his side. Caleb closed the door, turned the lock, and left the tree lights on. He did not need the darkness to make him brave anymore. In the living room, beneath Mason's ornament, Atlas circled once and lay down with a sigh. Caleb lowered himself into the armchair, one hand resting on the dog's back. The fire whispered. The clock ticked. Snow brightened the windows. And Christmas, at last, felt less like something he had survived and more like somewhere he had been invited to stay.